Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a late arriving Saturday Hodgepodge. I started to film this yesterday and I just thought I didn't have enough to say to fill up a video, so I didn't. I just wasn't going to make a Saturday Hodgepodge, and then I woke up this morning, actually Saturday, and thought, I do have a few things that I want to talk about. So first thing I want to talk about is just an adventure that I had on Thursday, and that is in dealing with a snake that was in our garage. My wife went out to the garage, opened the garage door, and was walking around the back of her car to get in and go to work. And there was a huge snake laying behind her car. And she came in the house and she said, "I'm going to need some help here. There's a big snake in the garage." And my first reaction was, well, what's my wife's idea of a big snake? Any snake might be a big snake to my wife. I went out there and it was in fact a really big snake, at least 3 feet long, and I would guess a little over 3 feet, which, if you think about a yardstick, that's about how long the snake was. And it was definitely a big, full-grown, mature snake. And, I'm not a herpetologist who knows all about snakes? Anyway, I'm not a snake knowledge person, and so my first reaction was to try to figure out if it was a venomous snake or not, and I really couldn't tell at first because the markings looked like it could be a venomous snake. Its head wasn't exactly, kind of the traditional viper shape head, but I wasn't going to take any chances. So I just thought it was laying really near the edge of the garage, like where it was just almost outside the garage. So I thought, well, if I poke it with a shovel, maybe it'll just go on. And you may be thinking, well, venomous snake, you should just go ahead and kill that. I have unfortunately had to do things like that in the past, and I really don't enjoy killing things, particularly if I don't know if it's a venomous snake or not. I didn't want to kill it, and also I was afraid the snake was big enough where it would be there would be some risk in me getting close enough to it to kill it with a shovel. I wasn't at my age now, I wasn't that sure of my aim or that confident in my ability. So I thought I'd poke with a shovel and make it leave, and poking with a shovel didn't make it leave. It made it coil up like it was going to strike, and then I poked it again, realizing something had to be done. My wife had to go to work. There was no way she'd walk past the snake. And when I poked it again, it began to try to get away, only instead of trying to get away going out of the garage, it went into the garage and trying to go under my wife's car, which meant I had to literally scoop it out of there with a shovel and kind of throw it up into a flower bed from which it crawled on. I since learned that the snake in question was a Texas rat snake. It's actually just a western rat snake. I don't know if you know about Texas, but in Texas we like to name everything about Texas. So it was a really big rat snake. That's what it was. They're not venomous, and as a matter of fact, they're quite helpful. So I was really glad that I didn't try to kill it, or I wasn't brave enough to kill it. And aside from just not liking to kill things, it occurred to me, and probably because I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. It occurred to me that these encounters that I have in my incredibly suburban neighborhood, which really is now, even though it began as its own small town, a part of just urban crawl and the spreading out of cities, that I've had a lot of encounters with nature since living here. There are owls who lived in the trees behind my house, hoot owls. There are hawks who regularly hunt around our neighborhood. I've seen skunks. We had an opossum, or as we call it in Texas, the South opossum, living in our garage. There's a bobcat that lived in our neighborhood for a while. I've seen coyotes and heard coyotes in the past. That hasn't happened for a long time. The snake. We have bunnies, squirrels, of course, all kinds of birds. Since we live relatively close to the coast, we have all kinds of birds. And it occurs to me that I really always enjoy these encounters with wildlife. And even now, so I'm telling you the story, I enjoy the encounter with the snake now that it's all over and the snake appears to be gone. He hasn't made a return visit to the garage. But the truth of the matter is, these are all animals who would prefer not that we not see them. That none of these animals want to be living in the neighborhoods in which we live, and that, as a matter of fact, the fact that I see them, the fact that I see these snakes, these other animals, is because they've been dislocated by the growth of humanity. And as much as I enjoy seeing them, there's kind of a bittersweet thing to realize the only reason I'm seeing these animals is because they're being displaced by the growth of the town, the neighborhood, the city I lived near. But I don't know why I wanted to reflect on that, but I wanted to tell my snake story, I guess, so there we go. This week in reading, I did finish up Victober, and I did get through all my Victober books. I finished listening to The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins on my way home from my visit. I went to visit my mom at the beginning part of this week, so I did finish that, and I also got through New Grub Street by George Gissing, which I really liked. I like both of the books. I will say, and I think I said this before, Wilkie Collins, who never met a character he didn't want to give full rein to in terms of their discussing things and describing things. But I enjoyed listening to The Moonstone. Again, because it's kind of a mystery, it's a mystery in which you're not given the clues to solve. But because it's kind of a mystery, I think it works really well in listening to it, because it was almost like a radio play. Even though it wasn't acted out that way, it was just read that way. It really worked that way. It probably helped that the novel is largely kind of epistolary in the sense that it's people telling their versions of the story. But I really did enjoy it. I listened to that on LibriVox, by the way. And then I read New Grub Street, which has to be, I think, possibly my favorite Victorian novel to date, in part because its ending is such, and I don't want to give anything away, but its ending is such that I think it really forces you to think not only about the values of the time of the Victorian time period, but about our values that we have today, and what we reward and who we see as valuable and what we see as important. It really is an uncomfortable, at times almost painful book to read, because for me, the people that I wanted to be successful end up not being successful. And the tragedies that occur feel like real tragedies to me when reading it. But it was just really brilliant. If you've never read George Gissing, I've read 2 books by him, The Odd Women and now New Grub Street. I just think New Grub Street is just absolutely brilliant. And if you are looking for an early add to your Victober TBR for next year, I highly encourage it. I really look forward to what people have to say about it. I plan on doing a full Victober wrap-up maybe on Thursday of this week, in which I'll go into more depth, I think, on the book. But it's just a really great book and a great reading experience. I started Nonfiction November this week, and also I'm participating in the Skoden Read-Along, hosted by Kim, the Native Lady Book Warrior. And I started on my Skoden reading first. I am reading Red Nation Rising by a group of indigenous authors looking at the history of colonial settler violence and its carryover into the world today. And it really is an interesting, very political, very impassioned book about encouraging political action by looking at the history of the treatment of Native Americans in the United States in the past and in the present, and then ideas about moving forward. I just found it to be incredibly, realigning in kinds of my visions. One of those books that, as a non-Native person, someone who raised in the traditions of the settler hero and the frontiersman and all those kind of things, it really challenges a lot of those ideas. And I find that when those ideas of mine are challenged, that my first reaction has to be not to just dismiss it. One of the things I think that a lot of times happens when people read a book like Red Nation Rising, or maybe they read a book like, I don't know, How to Be an Anti-Racist, or whatever it is, that when white people read those books, I think our first reaction is somewhat of a defensive reaction. We're like, oh, well, you only feel this way because you're a member of that group. And you have to remind yourself this exactly. They only feel that way because they're a member of a group that has suffered from severe racism and mistreatment and violence at the hands of people historically who look like me. Now, let me just reiterate. I don't think it's healthy for white people to feel guilty about things that other white people did in the past, but I do think we have a responsibility for fixing the problems that linger from the actions of white people in the past. And again, I'll say, the reason why I think white people have an obligation to do this is that as it stands today in the United States of America and in most Western nations, white people still control the levers of power. Whether the majority population or not, white people still control the levers of power. And the very least thing we can do is to listen to the voices of other people tell us their perspective on what's happened, and to challenge ourselves to be open to those ideas and to think through those ideas and to reassess our own beliefs. And Red Nation Rising is having that effect. In a similar but a far more gentler but no less political way, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer is just a lovely, lovely book in which essentially it appears, I think I'm on about page 201 or something like that. What the author is doing here is essentially arguing for reassessing our repositioning the way we deal with nature from a Western perspective, where we look at nature, the natural world, for the resources, things we can get from it to make money, and to look at it as more of as ourselves as a part of nature, a cooperative part of nature, and to reassess kind of how we look at and how we deal with nature in a more in line with the way in which Native Americans have traditionally lived in the natural world and respected the natural world far more than people of Western capitalist society do. And it's just beautiful and brilliant, and she is such a good writer. Just the kind of prose where you just, I don't know, you sink into it like a comfy chair, and it's just like so fulfilling and meaningful and powerful and subtle and quiet. It really is so far an amazing reading experience. I'm glad I finally got around to it. Anyway, there is my reading week. I think I would be remiss, being a fairly political point of view, if I didn't mention something about the elections taking place this year in the United States. Here we have midterm elections coming up on next Tuesday that will decide really the balance of power in the United States Congress. You know, the president isn't up for re-election, but 1/3 of U.S. senators are, which is about 33, and all the members of the House of Representatives are. As it stands right now, the House and the Senate are controlled in very narrow margins by the Democratic Party, the same party as the President of the United States. So, you know, if Republicans win control of the House and the Senate, you could expect that Joe Biden's agenda will not get anywhere with Congress. I think they've made it clear that they don't intend to allow him to do any of the things he wants, that we will look at 2 more years of stagnation. And so what I want to do, without maybe addressing this any more directly political I can, is just to appeal to people in the United States and then in your own country, if you're not an American citizen, when it comes to election time, ask yourself, do you want to give your vote and support to people who only talk about and emphasize the bad things only up until election day? You know, right now one of the issues that's being made a big deal of is a rising crime rate in the United States of America. I promise you, the party which is hammering the idea of the rising crime rate and somehow making that the responsibility of the United States Congress, which it's not, I promise you they will drop that issue and you will hear no more about it the day after the election. The same thing is true with inflation. You know, you may be looking at it thinking inflation is terrible, and it is causing real damage, but what does the party who is harping on inflation, what are their plans to solve inflation? Because as far as I can see, the party here in the United States who is making inflation the biggest issue has no plans for solving the problems of inflation other than giving more money to rich people, which I can tell you is not going to solve that problem. Do you want to vote for a party which encourages the worst instincts in humanity, that encourages us to hate those who are different, that encourages us to divide ourselves into group by race, by gender affiliation, by sexuality? Do we want to really encourage a party who does that? Do we want to vote to give power in our government to a party who we know is openly supported by racist and white Christian nationalists in the United States of America? Is that who you really want to give your vote to? Do you want to spend at least 2 more years of the government doing nothing about the issues that matter to us most and the issues that should matter to us most, to give those people power to essentially do nothing more than thwart efforts perhaps by the president to do things about those, to solve those problems? You know, do you want to give power to people who see the solution to our economic problems, that take money from our most vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, the disabled, in order to create more profits for corporations? I really I really feel deeply about these issues, and I realize this is a book channel, which is why I put this political thing here at the end, and I will bookmark it so you can skip it if you want to. But I really wish people would think about those issues in that way before they go and vote, if you haven't already. Anyway, do go vote regardless of your political affiliation, your ideas. I think that's an important thing, that we exercise our right to vote. I just happen to think it's important that we vote for people who are not actively undermining elections. Anyway, there you go. There's my political 2 cents. And there's the end of my Saturday Hodgepodge. As always, I look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and thank you for watching.